Thank you, Louise, for having me. I had seen that somebody said you're going to Rhode Island, and they wrote something about coffee milk, and then I saw, did you Google it, or you?
Yeah, I put it on Wikipedia. I looked it up on Wikipedia. I was very, like, what is coffee milk?
And what did it say? Like, it was a whole Wikipedia?
Yeah, and apparently it's hyper regional. And actually we saw, well, I didn't put it out, so we still didn't need anything to eat, but we saw the syrup for it.
The autocrat, and yeah, there's two, right? Autocrat and Eclipse. There you go. Brought to you by Donna. Well, here's my little. And thank you for asking. When I first heard about Alice Ozma's The Reading Promise, my father and the books we shared, through a press release that I had received from the publicist, I was immediately excited about the book, the title alone. As someone who enjoys books and loves sharing them, the idea of Alice and her dad reading with each other for all those years was a fascinating concept. And as someone who has always read to my children, and I know how much they love reading, it can't be overstated enough, and they need to start when they're that little. In the book's introduction by Alice's dad, Jim, a retired elementary school librarian, he says that the greatest gift you can bestow upon your children is your time and your undivided attention. In The Reading Promise, this is evidenced by the love that Jim and Alice have for each other and for reading. The Reading Promise is Alice's first book, and I'm looking forward to number 2.
This is actually the second time I've been in Providence. The first time we were on a train to Boston, and when we got to Providence, I said, Alice is a town I've heard of. So I jumped off, and I grabbed her, and we stood on a platform, and I got nervous, and we jumped back on the train. But I always say, well, I've been to Providence, Boston, We were wandering around Brown University this morning, and I said, Alice, the ladies in this town certainly have great legs. And she said, if they're done, they will get them from walking up and down those hills. There's a couple of, you're probably familiar with the book, so what I'd like to do is give you a couple of incidences of why I think so highly of my daughter. In 8th grade, they put on a show called Your Good Man, Charlie Brown at Memorial High School. And none of us had a clue in Millville, we were real backward, none of us had a clue how the show went. So I said, the Kimmel Center, which is the Philadelphia Orchestra's home base, I know they had the CD. I said, let's go and get it. For auditions, my thought was that she would have a leg up for the part she wanted and she knew the songs. After we get the CD, we're in the car coming home, and I said, Alice, now you got a leg up on the competition. She said, nope, everybody who wants this can have this. She's going to tell everybody I got the CD, anybody who wants it. It wasn't about getting a leg up. She's still about doing her best, but now my book, it would have been about getting a leg up on the competition. Now, there's a couple of incidences come to mind that really pleased me. When she was a senior in high school, she's involved in every club that's not athletic. Neither of us are very athletic, so. But any club that involves talking, she'll be a part of her. So, she's the leader of like a literature club. She's a great leader, and she doesn't lead anybody out of ego. Every time, if she's a leader, it's to involve everyone, get everybody happy about what we're doing. There's a girl by herself, hadn't involved herself in the discussions with this after-school group, and Alice came over and she'll draw her in. Since Alice is a natural leader, everybody else will soon become friendly with her. She no sooner starts talking to this other senior, and the girl breaks down crying. And Alice said, why are you crying? What have I said to you? She said, today is my first day of Millville High School. It's my birthday, and nobody's spoken to me all day. She's the first one that spoke to her. And Stephanie is now, I would say, her best friend. She talks about Stephanie the most positively. Another little incident, she volunteers for high school students that are just, they want to go to college, but they don't quite have the skill level. So she volunteers at a high school. One of her students is Manny, and Manny is more a painter really than maybe an artist at heart. He brought in a painting of his mother he had done a spectacular job with. And he'd done paintings before that Alice saw, but this was a particularly nice one. And she said, what do you plan to do with it? I think his mother would have it. She said, no, I'm going to try to sell it. They're having an art show at the high school. You can either display your painting or try to sell it. And he thought he'd try to put $80 and he could buy it another present. Very, very poor. So Alice went to the high school, bought the painting, had him put a sticker that means it's sold, and gave it to Manny, but she didn't say a word to Manny. She gave it to Manny afterwards, left it for Manny to have for himself, so that this wonderful artwork would belong to him, and not put in hands that somebody wouldn't appreciate it. So he got the money and he got his artwork. Now, I didn't realize until 2 or 3 minutes ago that I'm supposed to read a part of this. So, without practice, I'm going to pick up on the introduction. Actually, she asked me not to read any of this book. She says it's too personal and she couldn't have written it truthfully if she thought I would read it. So I've only read the introduction, and somehow I heard the first sentence of the book. So I don't know how that got to me, but after that, I said, stop. I'm going to read it from the introduction. All this has certainly not made Alice a dull girl. I think in everyone's life there's an incident that defines them, that shows their character and what they're made of. I never made or wanted Alice to take a job while in school. I think those days should be reserved for learning and having fun. But there's plenty of time for the workaday world in the years to come, and I made enough through my work in the schools to provide what was necessary for both of us. Alice was free to do as she pleased in her spare time. She took it upon herself to write a play called Tiny, and organize other talented teens to help her put this play on at one of my schools during summer vacation. Other than providing the money she would need for costumes and incidentals, I had no role in this except as the adult in attendance. For her players, she used students from my school who had volunteered to take part in her production. These students ranged from the 2nd to 5th grade. None had ever taken part in adventures such as this. My schools always had a poverty rate of 88% or above. She could have chosen the more affluent school that she had attended as a child, which was located near our home. But it was her purpose to bring this sort of activity to children who had never experienced such things before. Over 40 students returned permission slips, which were very specific about what would be required of the actors as far as rehearsal times and dates. Less than half of her potential thespians attended the first rehearsal. The one who had shown the most potential in tryouts quit when she found she would not be given the female lead. It was all downhill from there. At play practice, attendance was rarely more than half the players who were scripted for their parts that day. Those who came often arrived late. Her patience was sorely tested as key players would stop attending rehearsals for days at a time with no notice or reason. Her script had to be redone again and again as she dropped the roles or combined them to meet the number of players she could count on being in practice. Those who had dropped out would sometimes return after a week and want their parts back. I was heartsick at watching what was going on and what stress Alice was forced to work under to make this play a reality. Never once did Alice lose her temper or give way to despair. I hated to bring the subject of the play up with her in our spare time, as I did not want my trepidations to overly influence her. I truly think that what she went through would have tested the patience of a saint and broken a man stronger than Ahab. But day after day, Alice would regroup herself and refocus upon what could still be done instead of what had been lost. The conclusion was a play that would have done a high school theater department proud. And she did another play the following year to similar results. Caring, confidence, and optimism define her. I've never known her to be a mean-spirited act or even think of putting herself ahead of others. Before I had any children, I used to say, when they come along, I'll not speak to them until they're 16. Then I'll tell them to get a job. That's the truth. I remember telling my wife that all the time. Holding them in my arms made me rethink that idea. I've discovered very little in life that I'm adept at doing. I cannot fix your car, repair your roof, or even drive a nail straight. I get to stop for a minute and tell you. I had this lady friend, I think she might be mentioned in the book. One day she came over and I said, come around back here. And all I pointed to was a nail on a piece of wood that I had tried to repair the framing of the back door. She just looked at it and looked at it and I said, did you see it? I see it. I said, that is the truth. I said, that's the first nail I ever drove straight in my life. If a child sees something in a parent that the child aspires to, he or she will copy that parent and be content. If children feel that a parent is living a life that shows compassion and understanding, patience and love, that child will not have to reach a stage of rebellion against that parent. Why rebel against someone who wants to listen to you and wants to help you fulfill your dreams? A parent who has proven time and again that the growth and happiness of his and her children or her children is priority number one, does not have to worry about where those children are heading in life. They will be sensitive and productive members of society for as long as they live. Now I can tell you one other thing. I'm hard to shut once I get started. I have two daughters. The other one is the opposite of this one. She hammers me all the time. 2 out of every 3 things she tells me. Finally, I say, Spider, how do you think your dad lived all these years? She'll say, I'll never know. But this one's always positive. She bites her tongue, I guess, a lot, but she doesn't ever put my feet to the fire. Are you ready to get up?
No, I think I'll do mine from here. Okay. But you can sit here. You can hear it. All right. So
I'm not supposed to hear it all.
He's not supposed to. Yeah, he has to daydream when I read from the book. So, first of all, thank you guys so much for having me. This is such a really different town than anywhere I've ever been. I apologize that we got started late. Somehow we both thought the event was at 2:30, so I don't know how that happened, but I am sorry about that, and I'm glad we're here now and having a good time. But as I was saying, this is a really interesting town, and one thing that I really like about it is I feel like from block to block, I'm going to a different town. I'm like, now I'm in the artsy part, now I'm in the business part, because it's so compact. You have to have everything on top of each other. So it's really fun, and it's very walkable. I'm really enjoying it. So I'm going to read, typically what I like to do is read the first chapter of my book because it's short, and it tells our story without me having to summarize it. So if you have no idea what we're talking about and you just showed up because there were pretty posters, and they are pretty, they're professionally done. If you just showed up because there were pretty posters, then I can fill you in. He's not going to pay any attention because, like we said, he hasn't read it. So there's a train ride mentioned in this chapter, the very first chapter, and that train ride is the train ride he's talking about, the one where we hopped off and said we're in Providence. So there is a small Providence connection in this book, despite the fact that this is our first time ever really being here. I begin every chapter with the day that we are in the streak and a quote from a book that we were reading around that time. And it was really difficult to come up with a quote to begin the first chapter because you're really setting this tone. And what tone do you set for the beginning of a book? I mean, that's like, I don't know. I thought that was a really big challenge. And I'm noticing, by the way, as I'm doing promotional videos and I'm seeing myself on video a lot, I notice I go like this a lot. So I'm trying to stop. If you find it distracting, you can tell me. It's like I'm like pulling you in because apparently it wouldn't be interesting otherwise. This quote is from The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, and we were a big Oz family, so it fits. But the quote itself, I thought really applied to the streak, so here it is. I am terribly afraid of falling myself, said the cowardly lion, but I suppose there's nothing to do but try it. So get on my back, and we will make the attempt. L. Frank Baum, The Wonderful Wizard of Oz. Someone had mentioned closing the door so my dad couldn't run away, and now he's in the hall. So. I'm sure of it. The 3,218-night reading marathon that my father and I call the streak started on a train to Boston when I was in 3rd grade. We were reading L. Frank Baum's The Tin Woodman of Oz, the 12th book in the beloved Oz series, a few hours into the trip. The woman across the aisle turned to us and asked why my father was reading to me on a train. We simply told her that this was what we always did. We'd been reading every night for as long as I could remember, ever since we read Pinocchio when I was 4. Being on vacation didn't make much of a difference. Why not read? Why not always read? But her surprise made us think. If we were going to read on vacation anyway, how hard could it be to just make reading every night an official goal? I suggested to my father that we aim for 100 consecutive nights of reading, and he agreed to the challenge. This is how I remember it. If you ask my father, though, as many people recently have, he'll paint an entirely different picture. Lovey, he tells me, as I patiently endure his version of the story. I love doing events with my dad because my impression of my dad, I think, is like kind of accurate, but if he's not around, everyone says, is he British? Is he a woman? Now my impression makes more sense. Because his voice is higher pitched than mine, so I don't know. Lovey, he tells me, as I patiently endure his version of the story. You're cracked in the head. Do you want to know what really happened, or are you just going to write down whatever thing comes to mind? Lovey, as I'm sure you can guess, is not my real name. As are all things in my father's vocabulary, it's a reference to something. This time, it's Mr. Howell's nickname for Mrs. Howell on Gilligan's Island. My father never calls me by my name. Lovey is his most commonly chosen alternative. But when I drop something, or forget something, or do any of the silly things we all manage to do on a regular basis, Lovey is often followed by phrases such as, you nitwit. So tell me then, I say, standing in his doorway as he gets ready to run errands. Well, when did Mom leave? I was 10. All right, so 1997 it started. The streak was a year old when she left. And what were we reading? Well, he says thoughtfully, it had to be an Oz book. That's what we were into around that time. I wanted to try other things, but you were set in your ways. So far we agreed, but I know this won't last long. We were on the bed. We just finished reading, he says, and I was fearing the curse of Mr. Henshaw. What is that curse? Dear Mr. Henshaw was the book I was reading to Kathy when she asked me to stop reading to her, he says in an almost whisper. It is clear that this memory, though nearly 2 decades old, still troubles him. My sister was in 4th grade when she said she no longer wanted my father to read to her. It seemed childish to her, especially since she was already reading novels on her own. But it wasn't so easy for my father. He was an elementary school librarian, and reading to children was what he liked to do best. And maybe next to being a father, it's also what he does best. His soothing voice and rehearsed facial expressions have won over thousands of children throughout his career. They won me over too, but I was already on his side. For some time, I've been planning to suggest to you that we do a streak, because then at least you'd be a little older when we stopped reading together. I brought it up, and honest to Pete, I thought you were going to say we should read 100 nights in a row. He laughs as he recalls this. I don't laugh because I think I did suggest 100 nights in a row, initially. No, he continues, right away you said, let's do 1,000. And I had to pretend to be enthusiastic, but I wasn't too optimistic. 1,000 nights is a long time. I have to stop him there. None of this sounds right to me. First, I remind him that our goal had been 100 nights. When we reached that goal, however, and celebrated with a pancake breakfast at the local Lucy Spoon, we decided to set a new goal. We skipped the discussions of lower options from 200 to 500 and ultimately decided to try for 1,000 nights. I tell him this, but he just shakes his head. When I try to explain that the streak actually began on the train, he cuts me off. Ah, the curious incident of the train in the nighttime, he says. Adapting the title. See, some places I read that doesn't get a laugh because they don't know what it's a reference to. Adapting the title of one of our favorite Sherlock Holmes stories. I remember that part clearly, he continues, because I never miss an opportunity to brag about what a good father I am. That is true, he never does. And these are all direct quotes. We were on the train to Boston, going up to see the sights for the weekend, and the woman next to us said how sweet it was that I was reading to you. I told her right away we were on a streak, 40 nights in. I was pleased with myself, absurdly pleased with myself, pleased as a peacock to have made it 40 nights. We both laughed this time, and I am laughing partly because I know his obviously. The thing is, no matter how many times we're asked, we can never get this story straight. We agree on a few of the details, but I was very young and he's getting older. Some memories blend with others, and our individual versions of how the streak started change so often it's nearly impossible to come to any sort of an agreement. We can't even remember when we started calling it the streak, or whose idea it was to do so. If we knew it would eventually reach over 3,200 nights and span almost 9 years, from elementary school to my first day of college, we might have taken notes in the beginning. Years passed before we even started keeping track of the books we read during Red Hot, another term for our nightly addiction, phrasing we found in the great Billy Hopkins. Just because we didn't know how it would end, though, didn't mean we took our streak lightly. Our rules were always clear and firm. We had to read for at least 10 minutes, but almost always much more, per night, every night, before midnight, with no exceptions. It should come from whatever book we were reading at the time, but if we were out of the house when midnight approached, anything from magazines to baseball programs would do. The reading should be done in person, but if the opportunity wasn't there, over the phone would suffice. Well, just barely. I could always hear the annoyance in my father's voice when I called to inform him that I'd be sleeping at a friend's. He'd sigh and put the phone down, and I'd wait for him to come back with our book. Sometimes he'd ask to call me back in 10 minutes. I haven't even pre-read it yet, he'd protest. He insisted on rehearsing, and with more adult books, sometimes censoring our reading ahead of time. We remember details from later in the streak better, both because they were more recent and because our record was becoming more impressive. Once we reached over 1,000 nights, close calls and reading at quarter to midnight became a more nail-biting issue. Of course, we both remember how it eventually ended. That's the sort of event even my father can't forget, an event we dreaded for years. To get there, though, we need a beginning, and frankly, I don't know what that beginning is. I think I was leaning against him in the crook of his arm with my hand on his chest as our train to Boston sped past houses and schools and baseball fields that became colorful blurs. And Rhode Island. We were already dedicated to L. Frank Baum and the Oz books. In fact, we were reading the entire series for the second or maybe third time. My father loved Baum's take on leadership and women, not to mention his spot-on, frank humor that made us laugh a little harder every time we reread something. I liked the wonderful descriptions of beautiful places like palaces and magnificent dining rooms filled with people and good foods. Whenever we stayed in a hotel, which we were about to in Boston, I wondered if it was like the Palace of Lindo or Ricating. That night, as my father read the description of the palace in the Emerald City with its marvelous banners and gem-encrusted turrets, I squirmed eagerly in my seat, excited to get to the Marriott and check in. I review this and my father shakes his head. That's how I remember it, my father insists, after repeating his story at the beginning, now for the third time today, the details varying just a bit each time. Problem with my remembrances, though, he admits, is that they're so goofed up. I sit for a minute comparing my notes of both versions of the story, seeing what they have in common. I'm about to begin my argument once more, since simply repeating myself over and over again sometimes convinces my dad that I'm right, or at least wears him out. He knows I'm getting riled up, though, because his back is already to me as I begin my diatribe. I'm going to go look for treasures in the coat closet, my father says, heading down the stairs. I'm not sure if this is a saying I'm expected to know or a literal plan, but it's apparent that the conversation is over. I didn't think we'd come to an agreement anyway, but this is how I remember it. That's the first half. Can you stay up a little longer? It's the band.
He's really not ready.
No, he hasn't. No. We'll get to that. He's not ready for that. When we do questions, by the way, we'll do questions as the two of us. If you could not, if any of you have read the book, if you could not ask questions like, hey, in chapter 16, when that thing happens in the thing, what was the thing? Because then he finds out a lot about the book that way. And if you start to, I'll remind you. We don't do that. But you can be vague. That first chapter was a literal conversation with my dad. I pulled him into the study where I was working, and I asked him all these questions. And I don't know that he knew that I was writing things down. And then some of it was sort of like what I think he would say, or this is accurate to the voice. And so he's actually heard most of this chapter because we were being interviewed for the CBS Evening News. And they came to our house and they said, we want a shot at you reading the book to him. And we looked at each other like, pretending to read the book to him? And they said, no, we want a shot at you reading the book to him. And I said, all right, I'll pick key passages that don't give away anything. So I thought I'd only read him the passages that have quotes from him because you have to know those. I mean, they're accurate to him anyway. So I was wondering if they were accurate, and partway through us reading, he keeps cutting me off as I'm reading this to say what he says I have him saying in the book. So I'm reading the part where I say, when I try, we skipped the discussions of lower options from 200 to 500 and ultimately decided to try for 1,000 nights. And then I'm saying this about the train, and he puts up his hand and he says, the curious incident of the train in the nighttime. And I go, the curious incident of the train in the nighttime. But the one the cameraman starts looking at me, like, as we're filming this, he gives me this look like, is this like candid camera? Is this rigged? The one that really confused him was, I told her right away we were on the street, 40 nights in, and he cuts me off and says, I was pleased with myself, absurdly pleased with myself, pleased as a peacock to have made it 40 nights in. Like, exact quote. And the guy's like looking at us like, I don't really know what's going on here. I think at that point I wonder if he thought that the whole story was some sort of weird fraud and we were just these people who claimed to have read for this amount of nights. I think they thought we were pretty weird. All right, before I go too much further, I have a favor to ask. I never do this, I don't have favors, but I'm participating in a celebrity speed reading contest. Yeah, I'm not looking forward to that. I'm really nervous, and I've been practicing. It's going to take me, like, if I do it right, it's going to take me about 2.5 minutes, but I noticed there's a couple kids in the room, and I promised I wouldn't do it unless there were kids in the room, but since there are, would you mind if I run through my celebrity speed reading?
No, go ahead.
Go for it.
Okay, it's not going to be good. I can promise you that. I've been trying it. The thing is, so I live with, I have 2 male roommates, and I picked up, this is the book we have to read for the contest, and I pick up a copy of the book, and I bring it to him, and I go, this book is so hard. It's Fox and Socks by Dr. Seuss. And I say, this book is so hard, guys. Why don't you try it? And I have been reading it, like, as slow as I could, but still tripping over my words, and they pick it up, and they're so apparently everyone can read faster than me naturally, which is horrifying. So I had to learn to speak it, I guess. I'm terrible with tongue twisters. Okay, so now I'm making up excuses. Don't judge me too much. Okay, Fox and Socks by Dr. Seuss. I'm nervous. This is my first time doing it in front of a crowd. That's why I had to do it for you guys, because when I do it in front, okay, you understand.
Yes, we get it.
Okay, Fox, Socks, Fox, Knocks, Knocks and Box, Fox and Socks, Knocks on Fox and Socks and Box. Socks on Knocks and Knocks and Box, Fox and Socks on Box and Knocks. Chicks with bricks home, chicks with box home, chicks with bricks and blocks and clocks home. Look, sir, Mr. Knoxer, let's you trick with bricks and blocks, sir. Let's you trick with chicks and clocks, sir. First I'll make a quick trick brick sack, then I'll make a quick trick block sack. You can make a quick trick chick sack, you can make a quick trick box sack. And here's a new trick, Mr. Knox. Socks on chicks and chicks on Fox. Fox on clocks on bricks and rocks. Bricks and blocks on chicks. Bricks and blocks on chicks on box. Now we come to ticks and tacks, sir. Try to say this, Mr. Knoxer. Clocks on fox stick, clocks on knock stick, sick, brick stick, sick, chick star. Please, sir, I don't like this trick, sir. My tongue isn't quick or slick, sir. I get all those ticks and pox, sir, mixed up with the chicks and tots, sir. I can't do it, Mr. Fox, sir. I'm so sorry, Mr. Knoxer. Here's an easy game to play. Here's an easy thing to say. New socks, who socks, who socks, who socks, who sews, who socks, who sews, who socks, who sees, who sews, who sews socks, sir, you see, who sews, who's new socks, sir. That's not easy, Mr. Fox, sir. Who comes, crow comes, slow Joe, crow comes, who sews, crow sews, who sews, crow sews, slow Joe, crow sews, who sews, who sews, Suso, sock, fox, Suso, socks, and fox, and socks, now, slow Joe, crow sews, knocks, and box, now, Suso's rose on slow Joe, crow's clothes, fox sews, hose on slow Joe, crow's nose, hose goes, nose, hose goes some, crow's rose goes some. Mr. Fox, I hate this game, sir. This game makes my tone quite lame, sir. Mr. Knoxer, what a shame, sir. We'll find something new to do. Now here's lots of new blue goo now. New goo, blue goo, gooey goo, blue goo, new goo, gooey gooey. Gooey goo for chewy chewy. That's what that goo goose is doing. Do you choose to chew goo too, sir? If, sir, you, sir, choose to chew, sir. With the goo goose, choose, sir, do, sir. Mr. Fox, sir, I won't do it. I can't say it. I won't show it very well, sir. So this way we'll find another game to play. Bim comes, Ben brings Ben broom. Ben brings Ben broom. Ben bims Ben broom. Bim bends Ben broom. Bims Ben broom breaks. Bims Ben broom breaks. Bims Ben, big bands, pig bands. Bim Ben bands with brooms. Ben bangs and bims and booms. Pig band, boop band, pig band, boop band. Mike and Mouth can say that. No, sir. Mike and Mouth is much too slow, sir. Well, remember, you're not this way. We'll find you something it can say. they read 15 seconds and you read 15 seconds. And my plan is I'm going to find the person who has the least to do in their life and pair with that person. I'm going to say we're going to practice all day, every day. And also, I want to find somebody who talks for a job, career. So the host of a radio show is my choice so far because she only does one show per day. What else is she doing? I'm an author. What else am I doing? We'll get together. But thank you so much for listening. Now I know that the beginning. Normally I do the beginning flawlessly, but I was like, you know, revved up, so I didn't. Okay, thanks. So enough of my practicing speed reading on you guys. Now we can talk about the book. So, no, I'm still not ready for you to come over.
Oh my
Just
God.
kidding. Just kidding.
Power.
You can stay in the room, but you can't. I'm not ready for you to come sit because I get nervous. Oh, your hair is so pretty. So, one of the things that I think people respond to in our book is the fact that it's not just a book about reading, it's a book about family, and it's a book about spending time together. And whenever I talk to people about this concept of starting a reading streak, I always try to emphasize that even if you don't have kids or your kids are living away from home, there's probably someone in your life who you can do this with. Someone, you know, your spouse, your parent, you know, someone, even if you just found someone who's really important to you, maybe your godmother or godfather is in a senior home and you go visit them and try to, you know, be a big part of their lives again. Something like that I think can work really well, but I don't think it has to be a kid. If it happens to be a kid, you've got a lot of time left, so you can beat our streak and you've got years and years. But it definitely doesn't have to be a kid. And another thing that I think people respond well to in our story is the idea that we read such a big variety of things. So I think that whatever your interests are, there's a way to do this. Even if you say, you know, my son and I love history, and we're only going to read history books. Or, for example, my dad's favorite genre of book is Elvis. So we didn't read Elvis books. I think most of them would have been kind of inappropriate. But we didn't read Elvis books, but if left at his own time, we will mostly read Elvis. So he reads good Elvis books, though. So and then I thought what we could talk about a little bit. Now you're allowed to come back over that. You can inch your way back over. He wrote something that we had tried to include in the book, and maybe we'll go on the paperback version of the book, about his advice on starting a streak and how to read to your child. And you want to tell them a little bit about your advice on how to read to a child?
Well, if you get opposition to what you're doing, my older one, sometimes she said, Dad, you're not going to read to me tonight. I'd say, Spider, that's fine. You go lay on your bed, lights out, no reading, no toys, no anything. You just lay on your bed. If I'm not reading to you, then you go lay on your bed. So she's stubborn. She'd lay on her bed. Well, after 15 minutes, she's going to come out and say, what do you want to read? When they say, oh, they won't let me read to them, I kind of think that that's not strong enough. If you're really into it, you get a good book. I don't know who wouldn't want to sit and listen to it. I used to practice, I still do practice. Before I would read to her, I would read to myself the chapter or whatever, a volume of material. Sometimes the chapters are too long, I just put a check where it's logical to stop in the book. And then my voices and my characters would sound. I try to change my voice for each one. While she was talking, brought to mind, when I'm retired, I read to senior citizens picture books. And when I first came in, I said, ladies, I can't fix your roof. I don't know anything about cars or electricity. The only thing I can do is read my picture books. So somebody suggested I read them classes, but I'm no better than anyone else at that. And they didn't say anything. They just kind of looked at me like, all right, go ahead. For about a month, I think they were pretty skeptical, but one day they closed schools in Melbourne. The snow was not quite as high as this table, it was pretty close. And I still came over and read to them. Once I make a commitment, I'm going to be there every Friday. I've been Mr. Friday in the better part of 2 years now. I think that kind of won them over. So now when I come in, they're already in the circle, and they say, here comes Mr. Jim. He brought his books. And they kind of hunch over, and it's the neatest thing. I will practice, I don't know how many hundreds of times, a picture books that I can say it by memory. And opposite of what she's doing, that's for a contest. I found that you cannot read a book too slowly if you're understanding. I mean, not just staggering over, I'm not staggering. I read it, I'll say a sentence, I'll wait, just as long as it took to say the sentence while they absorb it. I can read that way to a 4-year-old, a group of 4-year-olds, one of the schools I have. If I say a sentence and wait just as long as it took to say it, after a while they will repeat it in their minds, I'm sure. And they can understand something you wouldn't think they would understand if you give them time to absorb that thought, not just quickly move thought to thought where they become lost in it. So the books that I can read, I have done this. I went from a group of ladies who are close to, probably ages about 80, directly from there to a group of 4-year-olds and read the same thing, and both groups liked it. Just in the pacing. I don't know how much good this will do you, but I've recently developed the theory that when you read, it shouldn't be me here and my audience there. It should be one. We should all be one. I should just go with the flow, like there's electricity current going back and forth between us, and just try to absorb myself as just a part of the room. And it seems to work. They come out every Friday. The second place I read, they're all in wheelchairs, and it surprised me. There's one lady way in the back cutting things out. She's a pretty sharp-looking lady to me. I mean, attentive. They're all in her 80s. And when I came in, she looked, and then she took her wheelchair and spun it right around, brought it right over the other one. So I guess it's having some good effect. Anybody that volunteers, you know you get as much out of it as the people you think you're helping.
One thing that I thought that maybe it would be nice, so when we do this kind of thing, usually I go by myself, so it's nice that we're both here now, but I sort of like to do a little bit of a chat with you guys where we all just talk, especially in smaller groups like this, and then go to questions. And usually by the chat, I mean that I throw out some questions and my thoughts on them, and then if you have some thoughts on them, then as I go other places, I like to share what I learned in other places. And one of the things that I always like to ask, because it's a big, I get all kinds of answers for this, is do you censor what you allow your child to read on his or her own? Now, obviously, is that for me? Okay, thanks. We haven't gotten the water pouring down yet. One of the things that I have to honestly begin by saying is that I don't have kids, so I am not really a part of that conversation. It was what I read on my own was never censored that I knew of. Did you ever try to, did you care what I read?
Oh, what you read?
Yeah.
No, I really don't believe censorship and democracy are two things that go together. I mean, even if you don't like it, if you don't agree with it, or you think it's offensive, you'll stop reading it, but you shouldn't be told by someone else not to read it.
Did anyone have a thought? Yeah.
My kids are your age and a little younger, and as much as, and I've talked about this on the radio show, as much as I censored movies and some of the music, I never did with books. Whatever they wanted to read, they're both big readers, and a lot of times now, my daughter who's 20 will say, I can't believe I read that when I was that age or whatever. You know, I think it means maybe more to her now, but yeah, I absolutely agree with just allowing it's just a different imagery. It's just a different way to absorb the story.
Anyone on more of the side of that you have, which is, I actually would say I hear that slightly more. Has anyone, yeah?
You know how you go into the library and you pick a book for your child, you sometimes don't really know what the book is all about. You know, you just scan through and then you kind of like maybe the first page or the pictures, and you know, you take it home. So I found a book and I thought it looked like a baby's book and it had nice pictures, and I didn't really read the book. I brought it and I started reading for her, and as I was reading, I was like, I'm not sure if I want to be continue reading this book for her, because it was about a kid who was really not well behaved and doing the best things. So from that point, I was like, maybe I should read the books first before I take them in, you know.
Yeah, I specifically see what you mean is like with picture books, because in that situation, it's so easy to flip through that I almost wonder. Well, as a parent, I think maybe it's better that I'm the one raising the question, because I can say I'm not judging you because I don't have a kid, so I honestly don't know what I do. But I could see myself maybe flipping through picture books as opposed to like when Harry Potter came out. It sort of bothered me when Harry Potter came out, and I had friends who weren't allowed to read Harry Potter who I knew their parents hadn't read it, and I felt like if they were going to come down on it one way or another, I would have preferred if they'd gotten a copy from the library and at least thumbed through it and had an opinion based on something other than like, I heard a news report that this isn't appropriate. So I would say being more familiar probably always helps, being more familiar with those topics. And on a similar note, my father and I had this discussion about that. I think he reads picture books that are actually inappropriate for children in the sense that I think that they're really sad. And he reads two that really get to me. One of them, and I'll let him tell a little bit more about why he reads them because I don't want to speak for him. One of them that he used to read, I don't think he ever read to a class, but he read to me and my sister as a practice, is called My Faithful Elephants. Has anyone read it by any chance? The plot of this book, it's a picture book, it's about a man whose job it is to tend elephants at the zoo during World War II, and he's told that he has to kill the elephants because if the zoo gets bombed, they could get out. And for some reason he can't just kill them. I think they try something and it doesn't work, so he has to starve them. And that one is, so he was reading this to my sister and I, and he's going, what do you think? Can I read this in the school? And we get to the end, and if she's like 18 and I'm 10, no, you can't read this to anyone. And the other one that he reads, that he did read to seniors but never read to kids, is about, it never says it and it never talks directly with the character. There's a boy who's going through an event that just happened and trying to figure out his role in it, and the implication is the suicide of a neighbor. So anyway, I was wondering, and I was wondering what your thoughts are on those. Like, do you think that there are picture books that could be too advanced for some people, that those concepts are too advanced?
That picture book was, and actually I only read it, I'm trying to think of the title of it, probably come to mind before I
Wish I Knew You? Something
I
like
Never Knew Your Name. It's a picture book, and it's about a child who, he noticed a teenager, the child seems to be about 12, he noticed a teenager that always was by himself, no matter how many other guys in the neighborhood were playing basketball or they were going to the dance, he never participated. And the child thought, he's a nice guy though, I should reach out to him and we could do something together. But he never did. He always had an excuse at the last minute. And then it's pretty clear that the teenager jumped off the roof. It seems like it might be taking place in Brooklyn. He jumped off about kind of a high-rise building, and then at the end he regrets it. And the author's note is, this is written so that when you see a problem, don't just say somebody else will do it or it'll resolve itself. Try to step up and be part of the solution. It's not for someone else all the time, or it'll just work out on its own. Well, let me tell you a thought that came to me while she was talking. Last week, the Philadelphia Inquirer listed in New Jersey schools that there's less than 1% what they call advanced proficient in language skills. Less than 1%. That also, that obviously in my experience they didn't care what I thought, also goes along with they've completely cut reading aloud, even from the kindergarten now. Kindergarten. Nope, because it can't be tested. Everything has to be tested within 30 minutes of the instruction. I said, how are we going to test when I've read a Clifford book to a kindergarten? How do we test that? Well, then we don't do it. So we can't test it. Now, I raised these two girls on my own. Her sister's a Yale graduate, and she has the ability to write a national bestseller book. And one difference between what the kids in my school were getting and what these two got was they got read to, and read to, and read to. And with a score less than 1%, I don't know how those guys can say, we know what we're doing. What they're doing is the score every year is even lower. But now it's less than 1% of the high school graduates were rated as advanced proficient in language skills. I mean, you're going to get 1% no matter what you're doing. Apparently that's what it is. No matter how cool your program, 1% is going to pick it up. It's so frustrating. and they can't seem to get that across. If you know Jim Trelease, I've gotten to know him pretty well. He has so much proof that reading aloud can advance these children. Time magazine last week had an article. The children who were read to consistently in kindergarten were still outpacing their peers in 4th grade, just from what the kindergarten experience had been, whether it had been read to aloud or not by their kindergarten teacher. How? And Jim Trelease tells us, in Oxford, at the start of whatever class they're starting, whatever the topic is of that class, the teacher reads aloud, and not necessarily from the text or whatever they want to read. They read to the students first, then they begin the work. And he said, if it's good enough for Oxford, Complement's not good enough for these other schools. Where the schools have really dove into reading, there's test scores that went off the chart. But I couldn't convince anybody in Millville was deaf on deaf. Right after I retired, we got a new superintendent. This new superintendent is a former student of mine. As soon as he saw me, he walked up and said, Mr. Brazzini, you were one of my heroes. Within 6 months of him being superintendent, he got rid of the principal who told me I was never to read aloud again. You know, you didn't?
No.
Anyhow, he got rid of him. Unanimous vote of the Board of Education, he got rid of the principal. Of course, by then I'm out of a job. But,
You're giving a lot away.
oh.
I haven't read the book yet. Maybe, I don't know. Maybe I have.
Anyhow.
Well, now you make sense.
Yeah, it blows my mind because we were just at open house at my daughter's school and she said, well, I try and sneak in at least 2 read-alouds a week because we don't have time to read aloud. And she's in 1st grade, which we read every night, so she's hearing tons of books, but they're supposed to do a reading log every night where they write down what they read at night. But they don't have time to go to the public library, and they can't take books home from the school library.
I can tell you that. There's no
Yeah.
new books in the school library.
Yeah, and then I see kids that didn't turn in their reading log, and I think, how the heck are they supposed, if they don't have books at home, they can't go to the library, and the school doesn't let them take them home. Where are they supposed to find the reading material? And it just blows my mind. It's so opposite of, they should at least be able to take books home from the school library if they're supposed to be reading every night and that's their homework. I mean, I'm happy that's the homework, but they need access to books.
Well, I look at it as advertisement for the work that they have to do to learn how to read, and then they can say, well, look at these great books that are out there. This is what was going to make it all worthwhile. At the end of the day, I volunteered at the school of Wyman, because the local schools pretty much put out the word that I'm poisoned. I don't do as I'm told, so I volunteered in the neighboring town of Wyman, and at the end of the day, I would come in and read them 3 books, and I'll tell you what, it was the most fun. The kids would all sit so quietly. I said, this is a ton of fun, but in Millville, no, we can't do that.
I can't tell when you read, did you read one book all the way through, or would you just start out reading a book and then follow, and then would you?
Most of the time we read one book all the way through. We didn't really, I hear people using the phrase now, abandon books. We didn't really abandon books often, but there were a couple, because somebody recently asked me this and I had to like think in the back of my head. There were a couple that we didn't finish. The one that I didn't want to finish was The Old Curiosity Shop, because I don't know how many of you have read it, but it's just like, I feel like it's just like being physically beaten for hundreds of pages. It's so sad, and especially because I wasn't that old. I was probably like junior high when we read it, somewhere around there. I wasn't that old to have the maturity to say like, this is fiction and I don't have to be upset about it. Because every moment where you think something good is happening, it's an older man in this little world, and every time you think, oh, they've got money now and everything's great, but he sneaks away and gambles it away, and it's just like, oh, everything's happening. So, but he made us finish that, which and then, I don't know, I'm going to say the ending, but that's okay. And then she dies. It's just a miserable book. But we do like Charles Dickens. We do. And I would say my favorite book from the streak was Great Expectations. Would you say? What was yours?
Maybe you've never heard of it. It did win some awards when Zachary Weaver came to town. And the premise is there's 2 boys that don't have a thing to do. It's stinking hot. It's the start of the summer. It's in, I believe, in Texas. which is kind of an inferno. They don't have any money, they don't have any idea of how to spend their day. And I remember that's kind of what it is when I was growing up. My mom never gave us any money. I didn't get along with my brother, not too well. We couldn't be here 5 minutes, so it was a long day to figure out what to do. So I could really identify with these guys.
But it was also well written. It wasn't just too.
Yeah.
It could be boring.
Yeah. He doesn't do a good job of advertising it, does he?
No.
It's fine, they don't have anything to say. No,
Nothing to do all day. Right?
it was a very funny book, and there's some really classic lines. So it's the one that we always laughed about. There's a part where one of the characters, who's the one? Zachary Beaver. Zachary Beaver is watching TV in his trailer, just sitting on his couch watching TV, and these two kids peek in the window and see him watching TV, and he sees them watching him and yells, "You perverts!"
Oh, no.
And we thought that was like, he's just watching TV. But that was a book we really enjoyed. But I would say Great Expectations was my favorite.
I'm sure you guys are on the same page with me. So I'm preaching to the choir. I said, it's what the preachers do. If they're in church, they at least got an interest. But when I see my former students, a lot of them are grown up now, the first thing I want to know, if they've got kids, and they say yes, I said, you're reading to them, right? And then sometimes I can tell. I don't think so. But they always say yes, because they know they're going to hear it. They don't. Then I say, look, even if you don't have an interest in reading, you want your child to go to college, you want them to go to for free, you don't want to spend $80,000 in debt when that child leaves college. If you will read consistently every night to your child, you're going to get a scholarship child, you're going to save money. Just work it out, 20 minutes a night, whatever it is. How much you're getting paid for doing that if you look at it that the child doesn't have any college debts and is going to go for free. This is an economic thing I want you to do. I'm trying to convince you.
It's Nelson.
Then if they're anywhere near my house, I always buy books at yard sales and flea markets and Goodwill. And right now my stack is probably 25. The next guy that says I want to read, but then I'm convinced that they do want to read, but they say, but I can't find anything, they get the stack of books. The guy, the driver that took us up to CNN, he was telling me about his daughter, and I really believe he's committed to his daughter. I said, are you reading to her? She's a kindergartner. She seemed like, from what he was telling me, she's an ambitious girl. He said, I wish I could, but I said, my English is really, really very broken. I said, when we get back to Mill, I want to show you something. At that point, my collection, I call them triples. I have my read-through collection, I have backups, doubles, but if it gets triple, then I'll give it with supply this high. I went out in the shed and didn't tell them what I was going to get. I just said, I'm going to show you something. When I came back, and these are all good ones, because they're triples of books that are in my playlist. Boy, oh boy, they was excited to see that. Big, big pile. They probably cost me over $100, because typically a book is $4 or $5 a piece, even if I buy it on Amazon. But at that point, that's what I'm buying it for. If I see it somewhere reasonable, I just put it in the collection.
One thing that I like to share with people is that, well, first of all, Halloween, it seems like it's going nowhere, but it is related. Halloween is my favorite holiday, and trick-or-treat is my favorite day of the year. I take trick-or-treat very seriously. I make these goodie bags that are like probably $10 worth of stuff per kid, and I decorate the driveway, and it says, come down our driveway, we have the best stuff in the neighborhood, and I'm like competitive about it. We have to have the best stuff in the neighborhood, and we've done it in the past, but last year we got Goosebumps books, and so in addition to the candy, glow sticks, rings, bubbles, hats, like whatever else I was giving, and it was all of those things, I had this big basket of Goosebumps books, and when they would come to the house, I would hold out if I thought they would read it, I would hold it out and say, pick out one they haven't read. And initially I was just saying, take one, and then I noticed the first kid is like going through, and I was like, oh no, they're all good, you should read them. And he said, no, I read this one, this one, this one. So what was actually the most fun for me about trick-or-treat ended up they were about getting the books, which they were. They were like, oh my goodness, you have goosebumps. It was how many they'd go through and say, I read that one, okay, I read this one, I read that one. So when people say kids aren't reading, I kind of wonder if they aren't aware of how much reading does go on. And sometimes it may be letting them read these things that they consider somewhat, they think that we'll think is taboo, like Goosebumps and Gossip Girl and all these things that like are really in for them and they're meant to make older people feel like outsiders and this is our thing. But I would kind of embrace that. If it makes them want to read, even if it makes them want to read rebelliously, then I think that's a good thing. I was really excited by how many of them wanted books and had to rifle through them to find the ones that they hadn't already read. And then one of my favorites, the girl's going through, and I thought this was so sweet. She's going through and she goes, and she said, I read them all. And I said, you did? And she said, but I got them from the library. So she wanted one for herself. And so not only had she read them all, but she got them all from the library. It was a great year for trick-or-treating.
It's so funny because I actually have had this thought. I went over this summer when they started putting the candy out, like in May or whatever, the Halloween candy, and I thought, we're telling these kids they're eating too much. It's no good for them, blah, blah, blah. You can't give fruit, you can't, nothing's how, you examine all this stuff. So I decided over the summer I was doing those. So I've actually been collecting, so I thought that was fun. It's all different ages, and plus, I have a million of them in the kids, but I love that, and I'm so excited about Halloween this year because I'm not doing candy and I'm just doing books.
Well, dentist gives toothbrushes.
Yeah, they give toothbrushes, yeah, and I just thought that would be so much fun because I think we have those conversations.
Dentists, they do.
It will be surprising and how many candy bars we eat. And then you don't want the kids to eat them, and then we don't want to buy it. I mean, it's just, besides opening the door to potential killers, but besides that, other than that,
Well, the one thing I will say, and I hate to say this, I think it's really important, if any of you are thinking about doing this, it's important how you display them. Because when I did it in the basket, they could rifle through, they liked that. I remember one year we had them all on the card table. This little girl turns down the driveway and sees that there's going to be books and throws her basket. She was in an angry mood. So what I did was I tried to present it as like this is the fun thing we're going to do. You're going to rifle through because I think the table of books was intimidating. So
yeah, and I think you're big basket.
A cauldron.
Yeah, a cauldron. That's a great idea. Now if I come trick or treating in Providence, there are going to be all these cauldrons of books.
I just think it's fun. It was one of those,
Well, kids like to have that. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, kids they like to pick it. Like I love the goodie grab bags when
Yes.
we were little, and
Yes.
that's what it's like to have
Yeah, and then, it's just, I thought that would be fun.
See, that's what I would be afraid of if kids are rifling through. Like I read that one, I read that, and like there's nothing here I like, or I read them all or something like
I don't know.
So.
Yeah, I'll figure something out.
But if they're in paper bags, so no one can see them.
I'll have a little surprise.
I was going to ask, could you imagine using like a Kindle or something like that, reading together, or is that take away
I think I don't know if we have the same, I don't know your opinion. My opinion on that is if it makes it easier, I think that's a really good thing in the sense like if you are a parent who is not a librarian and you can't go to your school library and pick out books every day and go into the library as a trip and you're only able to make that trip twice a week or maybe you're still on picture book, something like that, if it makes it easier and it makes you more likely to do it, if your kid can express an interest in a book and you can have that book in 30 seconds, that's cool. But I also grew up in an age with a lot more technology than he did. What's your thoughts on that?
When we started, 1998, 97, the Kindle thing obviously wasn't really thought of, and even when we finished, I think it was still unrefined, 2006, and I'm real technologically behind. If anything goes wrong, I say, I'll wait till Alice comes around, she'll tell me.
And then when I come around, I don't know, so then we wait till my boyfriend comes around, so there's this chain of waiting for people to come around. But I think had you grown up with it, would you think
I'd still be behind.
Okay.
Yeah, I have not read your book, but I'm very intrigued, and I am an elementary school librarian. So I was telling my students about, there are none here, but I told them about the event today and everything, and I was telling them, how do you think you would, like 100 nights reading, you know, I didn't even, and then after that I said 3,000 plus nights, and they were all like, oh, you know, but I wondered, I was using stuff like, well, through dating and going away and sleepovers and stuff, so I'm kind of glad that you included that, because that was going to be one of my questions. And also in what you said, even if there was no material, no book on hand that you would read, like baseball scores or something like that, because I'm of the opinion that all kinds of reading is important. And I come from a family, I'm an only child, but my mother and father were not well educated. I was, and I'm not bragging here, but I was valedictorian of my class, but my father had a 6th grade education, my mother had up to 8th. English was not their first language. They didn't value education either. They just let me do my own thing and always asked me to do my best, and I went to the library a lot and got a lot of books. But my father told me stories. He would tell me stories over and over and over again. Some of the same, some new ones, Bible stories, you know, ethnic stories. And I think that's what gave me my joy of exploring. I want to know more and more. So, books, yes, but, you know, other avenues.
Well, that made me, I totally lost that thought. I was thinking something while you were talking.
Sure, you were listening to her.
Yeah, I was listening to you. That you caused a thought, now I've lost that thought.
It'll come back.
Oh, well, one of the things I was going to say is I think I knew at a very early age that I wanted to do something with stories. I just didn't know what form of story, so I used to do theater, and I used to think theater was going to be the direction my life would go in. And then what's really funny now is I look back at my high school yearbook, and there's all these signatures from people that are like, can't wait to see you on Broadway. And it's so funny that my life went in like a cool direction, but it just wasn't that one. So I always knew that I was very interested in stories, however they were conveyed, plays, and I don't really like movies, but I like the idea of movies. I would enjoy reading a screenplay to a movie. I just don't really like, I can't sit down that long. And books, so I think I agree with you that I think just sort of the act of absorbing stories is really phenomenal, however that ends up happening. Maybe, I don't know, in my opinion, probably not TV. But well-crafted stories, I think, are something that's really good to have people with.
Did I hear you say that you used to read some nonfiction as well?
Well, I read a lot of nonfiction. He reads a lot of nonfiction, but we didn't read any nonfiction together that I can think of. We read a couple of biographies, but they were like biographies of so-and-so as a child, and then they're imagined. Somehow, I think they were like in first person, I did this, or something similar.
Classic orange cover with the black silhouettes. Yeah, well, I used to read when I was little. I found
What is it?
Childhood of Famous Americans.
Yes.
I read every one of them.
I love those.
We've had this discussion before.
It's so funny.
They're really good. They're really good.
And now they're classified as fiction, I believe.
Yeah.
So, you know.
I'm just curious to know how old you were when you started, you know, reading to where it became this book.
Well, how old was I when you started reading to me?
Actually, first time I ever read to you.
Okay.
Well, I took the theory, which I see now is not accepted as valid, that I would bring her on I would put her on the bed when we had the dolls, and I would talk to her. We would make stories about the dolls and their lives and the adventures they were having. And when she would respond to me with complete sentences, and I could tell that her thoughts were forming, she understood language, then I started reading. Now, I understand there's some that say, read, well, the baby's still inside the mother's body. And that might work, but at the time, my thought was, I want to know that she's understanding and says things back to me.
But I was hearing you read a lot because you were practicing for your school on me. So that started very young, didn't it?
I don't think think I practiced. She used to sit in a tub with a bubble bath, and I would sit on the toilet seat. And I would read pictures of practice with her. I practiced because it's always, I'll practice anything you want to do. You have to practice and do it well. And I always memorized the books I read. So she would sit in the bathtub, and God knows how she put up with this every night.
Well, I remember clearly when I would come later on when I could formulate my own thoughts. He would be practicing, and by I liked it, but I remember around the 5th book I'd say, I'm pruning. What about other questions? I guess we'll go into the questions. Yeah.
I think you touched upon this, but my struggle is that the child wants to read too. So how
To you?
Yeah. So how you balance that out?
Well, you can go.
Well, the research that I'm aware of indicates that the parent reading to the child is where the progress is made. Though, if the child wanted to, I suppose when I was done reading, that would be the time that you read. I've heard of parents that you read a page, I read a page, that kind of thing. I never considered that. I consider, probably it's really weird, but I consider I was at a daycare about 2 weeks ago, and they had a situation, they said, would you like to read to the children outside? And I said, no. Too many distractions. I consider what I do almost to be an art form, and if it's perfected, that's why I practice. So I take so much trouble picking these books and buying them myself. I want no distractions. I consider it, like I said, almost a form of art. So, no, she would get the polished version.
But I was going to say, when I say in the book that my sister said, I don't want you to read to me anymore, after she read the book, she called me kind of huffy. And she said, that's not what happened. And I said, what happened? And she said, as he would say, that's a very hard thing to do. She said, that's not what happened. I said, what happened? And she said, I said I was going to read to him. And that wouldn't fly. So. But I would say if it comes down to that she wants to read to you, and you say that's not going to fly, then it might be better to just let her read to you. That would be my opinion. When the time comes, I think I would probably do something along the lines of you read a chapter, I read a chapter. I would find the passing back and forth thing really distracting, and I feel like you would kind of lose there's something so nice about getting in the rhythm of it and just sort of letting it lull you, and I couldn't imagine that happening if you were switching off that frequently, but I think doing, you read a chapter and then I read a chapter in the same night, or you read a chapter one night and then I read a chapter one night, something like that could work really well. But I would personally really like the idea of having the kid read. I think it's something that could make you both get more involved. And then my mother was always really interested in, and I wouldn't do it because I thought it was corny, but she would say, let's read the same book and then talk about the book. So I think that's cool too. I just didn't do it because she would want to read like John Grisham or something. And I was like, no, I'm not going to read John Grisham. Yeah.
I was just wondering if you ever had a point where you couldn't wait till that night or the next, like how kids want to read.
No, yeah, well, the one that you always say, Half a Moon In.
Half a Moon In by Paul Fleischman. I had read it to Spider
Her real name is Kat, my sister.
She's maybe 4th grade, and we typically would start 7:30, 8 o'clock. And she wouldn't let me put the book down. She had to go all the way. She used to claw in. That one day I said to the teacher, I'm sitting in the teacher's room, and they said, "You live with cats." Why? And I said, "Your hands are all clawed." Well, that's the way she showed his pleasure. When I would say I'm ready to stop, she clawed me on that one. So we finished, and it took maybe 6 hours to read it. So when I got with her, I figured the same thing was going to happen. Half a Moon In by Paul Fleischman. We started early in the day, and she did the same thing. You can't put it down. You have to go all the way through in one sitting.
I don't remember the book at all. Yeah. Right. Apparently, because we went through it in one night, so I guess. I do remember that we read something and another one that I felt that way about, but he wouldn't follow through, was when we read 10 Little Indians by Agatha Christie. There were a couple points where, now I read a lot of Agatha Christie on my own, and I know it's her trick, where you're like, wait a minute, there's 100 pages left to go, but it seems like before I did that, and I made a promise to myself. I said, I'm going to be indulgent, and I'm going to sit down and read it all in one night. I didn't even read it over 5 hours. It was like an hour, just because I felt that even though I knew how it ended, I thought it was such a well-written, suspenseful book. So I find that the ones that we felt that way about, or at least I felt that way about, were the ones that were written so that you absolutely have to find out what happens in, the page turners. But I never really would have him to read something that was calm. By that time, it was the end of the night. It's the end of the night. But if I was anxious, then I'd say, and I remember one time saying something like, I have a test tomorrow. This is all I'm going to think about. Can't we finish this? Didn't work out here,
But you never thought of like grabbing the book and finish reading it?
No! That would have been wrong. I wouldn't have done that.
Yeah.
I woun't have done that. Even though he knew what happened ahead of time because he pre-reads them, but for some reason I didn't think that would be appropriate. Yeah.
Did you just like read by yourself with anybody else, or just like by yourself?
Well, yeah, so he was reading to me every night, but then I was reading on my own, and the weird thing was, he was reading to me in a way that we jump all over in age groups. Like sometimes we read something written by Charles Dickens when I was in 5th grade, and then later on, a book from a series that we liked when I was 10, there'd be a new book when I was 18, and we'd read that. So we were jumping all over the place. But the funny thing was, the only other major reading influence I had in my life at the time was my sister, who lived at home like in the summers during college, and she is 7.5 years older than me. So the stuff that I was reading was really not stuff I should have been reading. But so that's part of why I like to ask that question, because there's things that in hindsight I'm like, why did I read that at age 10? And it was just because she would pass these books along to me so anyway, yes, I read on my own, but a lot of what I read on my own, we would be reading something that was written for, like he bought it at the Scholastic Book Fair together, and then on my own I'd be reading David Sedaris. It was this like weird juxtaposition of feeling like a really little kid and like an adult at the same time. But I will say, I read things, going back to that, I did read things that in hindsight, when I had to, because I was an English major, I would have to read these in college. I think, what was I doing reading that when I was like 12? The one that I always think of, and this is embarrassing, the one that I always think of, when I was 12, my sister gave me Lolita, and I was like, oh, this is a good book. And then I read it, I was like, I don't know what's going on. And then I had to read it again in college. I was like, why did I read that when I was 12?
Did you process it the same at 12, or did it really?
All of the books that I reread when I was older, I found to be like a different book.
Right.
A totally different book. And I could like them when I was younger and dislike them when I was older. It was like, and I'm sure that you've had similar experiences where you read something kind of too young and then you have to reread it and you're like, I didn't know that's what this was about at all.
Right, so it's not even,
yeah.
Right, it's not the same effect as, that's why, going back to what we're talking about, so different than that visual of a movie maybe that's
yeah.
so graphic